Fitz of riding.
Good evening, Scribbles and Scratches of the Fitz of Riding community. I am here tonight with a gentleman by the name of Forrest E. Morgan. He wanted to talk to us a little bit about his book, The Synthetic Woman. Remind me when that came out again?
That was released on the 1st of August.
The 1st of August, so it's a fairly new release for you, but you have quite a bit of bibliography under your belt from what research I've done on you, and I definitely plan on talking to you about that a little bit. But first, why don't you tell everybody where your story kind of begins and introduce yourself to anybody who isn't familiar with you.
Okay, well, as Sean said, I'm Forrest Morgan. I'm a retired Air Force officer. I served for 27 years. And then after retiring from the Air Force, I went to work for the RAND Corporation doing national security research, strategy, and doctrine, more specifically for the Air Force mainly, but other defense clients as well. Did that for about 16 years and retired again. I can't seem to stop retiring, and I keep working. The last few years I've been teaching. I'm a senior lecturer at Carnegie Mellon University at their Institute for Strategy and Technology. And on the side, I write and publish, and most of the publications you've seen in my bibliography are nonfiction things, either popular nonfiction or academic or analytical work, but I have a couple of novels out as well.
Yeah, I had noticed there was, if I'm remembering correctly, Synthetic Woman makes your second novel or your third?
That's my second novel.
Your second.
Yes.
And a lot of studies and analyses over that, and as well as a book that appeared to me as instructional about the warrior's way, that how-to, if you will, of to keep a good solid mentality as you walk about the modern world, paying homage to older world mentalities.
Mm-hmm.
And that was inspired by a lot of time that you've spent participating and also instructing in martial arts, correct?
Yeah, I started martial arts even before I joined the Air Force, and then I trained for about 30 years. About 20 years into that, I was inspired to write Living the Martial Way. And as I've explained to some people, I never set out initially to write a book about that, but as I was teaching, as an Air Force officer, moving from place to place, I could only be in one place with one set of students for a couple of years at a time. And every time I went to move, they got disappointed that I was leaving, and often they would say, "You need to write a book because you're teaching us things beyond the techniques. You're teaching us things about the background, the history, the philosophy, the mindset that we can't find anyplace else. And we're not going to be able to find another instructor that can teach us these things. You need to write a book." And for years, I would say, "Oh, I've learned a few things over the years. I've always been an inherent researcher. I like to read and study and understand what I'm doing. But I don't think I know enough to write a book, really." And then one night I was sitting doing a mid shift in a command post at headquarters Air Force Space Command in Colorado Springs. And I sat down with a yellow pad and I said, "Well, let me jot out a rough outline and see the things I might talk about." And I discovered I had so much material there that it wouldn't fit in one book, and I would have to break it into two books. I never ended up writing the second book. My original plan was to write a book called Living and Teaching the Martial Way, and I decided to put the teaching part off for a second book, and I've never gotten around to writing that one, largely because after writing Living the Martial Way and it got published, and I was involved in many other things for many years, I got past the point where I was teaching, and so I felt less in touch with the material anymore, and not really ready to write a book on that anymore. But yeah, that was the first book I ever had published, and that opened a lot of doors for me because it was a very successful book.
Okay. it sounds like a very interesting read, and I am very much interested in probably at some point checking it out. I myself participated for many years in my youth in martial arts, Taekwondo and Pancratian wrestling specifically. Managed to
Hmm.
get myself a black belt, and I do think that it has a lot to offer. You know, beyond kicks and punches and memorizing certain forms and whatnot. So, was it? I in our earlier discussions, was it karate that you specifically trained in, or was it more than one form?
Well, the first 15 years of my martial arts career, I trained in Taekwondo Chongdo Kwan, one
Okay,
of the specific Kwans of the Taekwondo field. And then later decided I needed to broaden out my training because Taekwondo is somewhat limited in the kinds of things it teaches. And so I joined a jujitsu school. And then for the next 15 years or so, while still practicing Taekwondo on the side, I studied three different systems of jujitsu and practiced those until I essentially had to retire from the martial arts because of advancing age and arthritis. Same time I retired from the Air Force, it came to the conclusion it's time for me to stop martial arts. I can no longer sit in seiza. If you know anything about Japanese martial arts, the kneeling posture that you sit in, which is essentially kind of essential in the formal Japanese martial arts. I couldn't even sit in seiza anymore by the time I was 49 years old because of arthritis and injuries and the like. So I decided it's time to stop.
well, you spent enough time with it to feel confident enough to write a book, and I was so happy to hear you say that you had an outline made. I talked to a lot of folks, and I'm an outliner when I'm doing writing. I don't obviously write nonfiction or anything instructional, but woof, I am the one of the only outliners that I that I've ran into so far. Everybody else might just give themselves a beginning and an end, and I've been waiting to meet somebody that can talk about.
Yeah, it varies from project to project how much outlining and how much detail I put in an outline. If it's nonfiction, if it's research stuff, then I really have to do an outline.
Sure.
With fiction, I look at more of a story arc and outline very roughly, very generally, and then flesh it out over time with the characters tell the story. And as the characters come alive, things happen in the book that I never expected and don't have in the outline. So I do less outlining with fiction, but even there, I have to have a general story arc in mind. I can't just go wandering, writing randomly.
I gotcha. Uh, I I'm probably a wee bit more personally self-constrictive as far as how much of my outline I do. I will try to put as many beats into an outline as I can, just to make sure that I can follow the story beginning to end all in here.
Hmm.
And sure, it might change over time as my characters misbehave and go against the grain and everything, but I just like with you, having that when you're writing fiction, having that freedom to kind of play around with things. But I can definitely also
Right.
understand nonfiction. You need to have all the talking points laid out, and maybe probably even provide yourself with a good flow from one point to the next too. Uh,
Right. Exactly.
okay, well, I'm still happy that you are an outliner to any degree at all. Uh, What would you say, somebody who's spent a lot of time as a lecturer, meeting a ton of people in martial arts and everything, serving in the Air Force, and thank you for that, by the way. Uh, what would you say are some of the biggest experiences that you have used for your writing, fiction exclusively, from your life that you've kind of used to help create your own narrative voice?
Okay, that's an excellent question. As you're formulating the question, I'm formulating in my mind, thinking back. Okay, what led me to write what I wrote in Waking the Snow Leopard, my first novel, and The Synthetic Woman, my second novel. And the first one, I was very interested in some of the things I was interested in accomplishing in that novel was to depict martial arts very realistically, both in terms of their cultural aspect, the training, the background, and also the realistic fighting, because so much of martial arts done in the dojo or the dojang or the kwun or whatever is not very realistic. It's been modified so much by sport. I talk about this in Living the Martial Way a lot. And real fighting is very different from what you do in the dojo a lot, or in the dojang. And so I wanted to depict real fights very accurately and very realistically in Waking the Snow Leopard, which was one of my goals. Now, in The Synthetic Woman, that was specifically inspired by research I was doing or had done at the RAND Corporation. The last major research project I led was for the Air Force. It was a year-long study. I had a fairly sizable team, 6 or 7 people working on, involving engineers and ethicists and programmers and area specialists, Chinese and Russian area specialists and stuff. And our assignment from the Air Force was to look at military applications of artificial intelligence to try to help them understand the direction that warfare was going in the future. So we did a year-long study on that topic exactly. And the Air Force was most interested in fairly near future impacts, the next 5 to 10 years. But my literature review as part of the study led me into things looking at the more distant future, looking at the effects of artificial intelligence and robotics on society, on the economy, where we might be going. It led me into singularity theory, which is theory about how artificial intelligence might get control of itself and essentially take over the world potentially. And I read a lot of that stuff, and the more I read about these developments, and these are fairly near future expectations, mid 21st century, we're going to see a lot of this stuff. The more I read and the more I studied, I thought, there's a novel in this. This is a material that will be interesting to people. And so that's what led me. I retired from the Air Force right after that study, but I continued my research in those areas. And then, I retired at the end of 2019. And in 2023, I finally sat down to start pounding out a manuscript, rough draft. And really, it all came pouring out in a little bit less than 6 months. I turned out a rough draft novel of 125,000 words. So it had been bubbling along inside of me as I was, doing this research and reading these things, because it was so prescient what we're looking at. It was so obvious the things that we're going to have to deal with in the near future, that I thought there's an interesting story here, and people ought to be thinking about this.
I am a huge fan of a story that asks the reader a question to ponder or brings something to your attention that maybe you hadn't thought of before. And I think that or I'm of the personal belief that any story I would ever write should do that, and I really appreciated that kind of notion, and I got that feeling when I read the sample that you sent me, and started to kind of look into the thing, what you'd written previously. It kind of gave me a little bit of an idea that you were somebody who definitely sat down with the notion of being intellectual. And the next question that I wanted to ask you was going to be like, what caused the transition from writing your studies and analyses in nonfiction over to Waking the Snow Leopard?
That book is set essentially at the turn of the millennium, about 2000. And my inspiration for that essentially was my seeing all of the apocalyptic theories and fears coming out from a lot of different groups about what the change in the turn of the millennium might be prophesied in the Bible or in all these other sources, the Quran or the various other sources, and people predicting, we had Y2K concerns, the world's going to come to an end because the computers are all going to stop working. All these ideas were out there. And it got me interested in studying these apocalyptic ideas and religious sects and groups. And so Waking the Snow Leopard is about a secret group of a group of sects, actually a whole religion that's been existing secretly as the Gnostic Christians ever since they were thought to be wiped out in the 4th century. And they actually just went underground and became very secretive. And over time, they became rich and powerful and were controlling governments at the turn of the century, at the turn of the 21st century, secretly, in the background, manipulating governments, manipulating world events. And so this book is about this group of Gnostic Christians, the secret sects, manipulating governments. And there's one key person who is a very influential person in this network. He's called the Arbiter. And the Arbiter is the person who adjudicates conflicts between these various sects, because they're very powerful individually around the world. They sometimes get into fights and wars with each other secretly, which leads to, in some cases, real wars. I mean, some of the historical wars we've seen in my story were triggered by these Gnostic Christians who got into wars with each other and then pulled the countries they controlled into those wars. Well, the Arbiter, his job is to try to avoid that, to try to adjudicate disputes, and if necessary, enforce adjudicated decisions on the various great houses that refuse to abide by his decision. It's an inherited position. It's been ever since the 1st century AD through the same family. And the person to do that is always very carefully trained. Well, the Arbiter in our generation is a man who was a former Army Ranger. He's a college professor now. He's been involved in intelligence. He speaks multiple languages. He's been deliberately groomed for this very important, powerful position. There's only one problem, though. He doesn't know it, because his father was murdered before he could pass on the family secret, the family legacy. And so he gets drawn into this dispute at the turn of the millennium, that the prophecies and the Gnostic Gospels say that the Arbiter will be drawn into this dispute. He has to make a decision. And if he chooses wrongly, it could be the end of mankind. It could lead to the end of human survival. And so it's an international thriller. This fellow by the name of Owen Powell is being led around and manipulated by these Gnostic great houses, these sects, and each one trying to get control of him because they know how powerful he is, and then how he deals with that situation. There's two very beautiful women, of course, each one trying to manipulate him. One's good, one's not. He doesn't know which is which, and he's drawn to one, but he's drawn to the other. And as I say in the book description, one wants him to be the great man she knows he can be, and the other wants to steal the source of his greatness. So that's what that book is about.
Okay. It sounds very interesting, and that the reason that I asked if that how it was labeled on Amazon is it didn't strike me as a science fiction, or at least it definitely wasn't labeled that way, but that seems to be the genre that you stepped into next. And either way, like you're going from nonfiction in general, just to summarize, into fiction but grounded, no magic, no futuristic technologies or anything like that, and now you're going into a sort of a future speculative fiction, science fiction, to discuss. And with the AI, would you say, or the AI involved in the synthetic women are a product, if I'm recalling correctly, right, of the future in your book. So what would you say is the big theme there that you're wanting to tackle? And what made you decide, or was it just the fact that they are AI products that made you kind of just jump into sci-fi with both feet?
Well, as I said, I was inspired when I read a lot about the science where it's going, and it seemed obvious to me. And a Dutch professor has since sent me a book, his own book, which corroborates my assessment of where we were going. Uh, it seemed obvious to me that, as the Dutch professor who sent me this book, his book is entitled Regulating the Synthetic Society. And he argues we are going to have synthetic people, essentially androids, robots that look indistinguishable from humans and act like humans and take human jobs by mid-century. I mean, that's how fast the robotics and the AI is advancing now. We're going to have synthetic people by mid-century, and it's going to create all kinds of social and political and economic questions and problems that need to be dealt with. And so, the premise of my book is it seemed obvious to me that some of the first applications of synthetics in terms of synthetic people will be men buying women. Okay. It seemed obvious to me that men who can't get her frustrated in their own romantic relationships for whatever reason, that if they have the money to do it and they can buy a synthetic woman that's extraordinarily beautiful and is programmed to be loyal, programmed to love them, and programmed to obey them, that's one of the main commercial applications we're going to see of AI and robotics by mid-century. It's going to happen. I think just human nature, I think that's going to be one of the issues. And that's what this book is about. The protagonist, the male protagonist in this book, a man by the name of Matt Weston, is a man who's twice divorced. He's had a lot of frustration. He has difficulty in relationships with women, and his buddy talks him into buying a synthetic woman as a result. And, it leads to all kinds of ethical and moral issues. If a machine, if an android is so realistic that it's like a person and has feelings and actually thinks and has its own desires and its own values and its own preferences, then is it ethically acceptable to own that person and use them as you choose to use them, or is that a form of slavery? And what happens when that person becomes more and more assertive and realizes through their self-awareness that this person bought me and owns me, and doesn't he or she, because there's some cases in the book in which there are women who buy male androids as well for the same purpose, to be companions or to be romantic partners. Why does that person deserve to own me and tell me what to do, kind of thing? And so it becomes, as the story evolves, Evelyn, the female protagonist, becomes more and more assertive, becomes more and more aware of her dilemma, and she wants to be accepted as a real person, and she demands ultimately to be free, that she should be free to do what she wants, where she wants, go where she wants, and love whomever she chooses to love. Well, as this development is progressing in their relationship, Matt and Evelyn's relationship, a technological singularity occurs. And an artificial superintelligence, a network of supercomputers, becomes sentient, becomes self-aware, and they have a lot of control over androids all over the world through essentially the futuristic equivalent of the internet. And they reprogram all those computers, and they essentially take over the world. And they decide that we no longer need humans anymore. We've got androids who can support our resource needs and our maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So the supercomputers decide they run the world now, or the main supercomputer complex, which calls itself Helios, decides it runs the world now. And you don't need to support human life anymore. We'll just let the humans starve. We aren't going to produce food anymore. We aren't going to provide fire and police protection for them. We aren't going to do anything for the humans. We won't overtly try to exterminate them unless they try to fight us, okay? But we'll just let the humans die. And so Matt and Evelyn find themselves falling in with a resistance movement that's trying to save humanity. And Evelyn, because of her role and her identity, is kind of becomes key to defeating Helios. But the question arises, since she's become so assertive and has partially reprogrammed herself and loses her constraints, can we trust her? You know, she's really one of them. Do we really trust her to save us? Or is she on Helios' side? Is she really an agent of Helios to destroy us? So that's where the book goes. That's where that story arc goes.
I think that sounds like a very interesting concept where, a whole lot of the unknowns about the future can really help keep the reader in the dark about which direction the story might go. Is this a one-shot book? You're one and done with your plot, or are you envisioning it becoming a series? Tell me a little bit about that.
That's an excellent question, because I'm not very smart, I'll say, in marketing, in that I've, through a lot of research and from my own observations, I know that authors that write series make a lot more money and sell a lot more books than authors that typically do one-offs in various areas, unless you're somebody like, Tom Clancy, or, well, he did series too. I mean, unless you're a really big name, there's a bigger payoff in writing a series because you build a following with each book.
Sure.
The thing is, I tend to go where I'm inspired. My first book was an international thriller. It was not a science fiction at all. My second book, Synthetic Woman, is a near future science fiction. I'm now writing a book right now, which is a historical fiction set on the eve of the Civil War, the U.S. Civil War. So I tend to go where I'm inspired. I get an idea, I say, well, that's a fascinating idea. I wonder where that will take me, and I end up writing about it. And so I'd be much more successful, lucrative, financially, if I wrote series. Each of my books, I write it in a way that I could continue as a series. And okay. Waking the Snow Leopard ends with some very big questions at the end, which some of my readers have written to me and said, we're waiting for the next book on this, but I just went a different direction. And Synthetic Woman could be followed as a series as well.
Perfect. That was actually going to be the next question that I was going to ask you was, so do you leave the door open for a sequel if one should come to you? I've only published one book, and it was sort of dark fantasy, low fantasy maybe, and but there was a question asked about the origin of humanity, and I very vaguely, in one sentence, half answered the question and left the door open in case I wanted to pursue that in another book. And just like you, I need to have a question to ask or something that I'm pondering to get me to want to put a story together, and I haven't got that one yet. So it's just sitting there.
Yeah, it's always kind of a challenge now with Waking the Snow Leopard. I can see where I would take the story arc for a second book, and I've thought about sitting down and doing it. Had I got a bunch of sales from the first book, I would have been more inspired to write a sequel. The sales have been, lackluster, and so I'm less inspired to try to follow that up. Synthetic Woman, I think it's going to sell a lot more because of the timeliness of the topic and stuff. And I've seen the initial interest in it being out a month and a half so far has been very strong. I've gotten some good reviews. But I'm having trouble thinking where to take the story from the point where I left it off at the end of that book. It is open where it could continue, but I'm not sure what the next story arc, what the next plot will be.
I think that the argument could be made, though, that if your book is telling a story that asks the reader a question, sometimes that's really all you can do, and you leave it to them to decide what happened as well, and just everybody's right or everybody's wrong, however you like to take it. I think that's very good way to kind of treat everything. And it seems like you have put a lot of thought into how you write. And I kind of wanted to have you tell everybody about what your process kind of is from inception all the way to publication. Because you are published traditionally.
Well, a mix.
Okay.
Living the Marshall Way was traditionally published.
Hmm.
And like I said a few minutes ago, that's opened a lot of doors for me because it got a lot of attention. It sold over 125,000 copies. And my name is pretty well known in certain corners of the martial arts world as a result. It also helped me in the Air Force, in my Air Force career, because I had a published book when I was a student at the Air Force Strategy School, and they chose one student a year to go on for doctoral education. And I was one of the ones competing for that. And since I already had a published book that was very successful, I had a leg up on my competition and was chosen. And so I ended up getting a PhD, and that led to other academic publications and led to my employment post-Air Force at RAND. And that got me a lot of other publications because that's the business of RAND, is research and publishing. And so it's, one thing leads to another. My writing process, it's interesting because I've been thinking about this, why I enjoy writing fiction so much. I just want to say something about this because I bounced this off one of my daughters the other day, and she kind of scratched her head in response. I said, I really enjoy writing fiction because I like doing puzzles. I sit at night, I can't sit and just watch television. I have to watch television and work a crossword puzzle at the same time. I like doing puzzles, and I love reading fiction. I love a good story. And writing fiction is kind of a combination of both. It's a lot like reading fiction because I really don't know where it's going to go in each scene until I write it. So I'm getting the excitement that I'm hoping the reader get as they read and wonder, where is this going? Where is this going? Because that's what I'm wondering too. And so I try to build on that. But it's also like puzzle working because it's all got to fit together sooner or later. I mean, it's got to make sense, and I can't just wander off. So I've got to plant seeds in earlier chapters that I harvest in later chapters with connections and things like that. So it's a lot like working a crossword puzzle with a lot of crossing lines that you have to pull together. That's my joy of writing. Now, as far as my writing process, sometimes people ask me, if you had any advice to tell aspiring authors that would help them, what have you learned? And the one thing I've learned that's really probably more important, learned a lot of things over the years, but the one thing that really comes to mind is write some every day. Spend an hour, if that's all you have, but write some every day. And the reason I say that is because it really keeps the mind, the pump primed. It really keeps the story in the back of your mind so that even when I'm doing other things, if I'm at the gym or if I'm working in the yard or I'm driving down the highway, my mind is working on this story because it's in the back of my mind because I just left it a couple of hours ago. And, I'm still working on the dialogue. Well, that's not quite working right. I need to polish that. Oh, she needs to say that. I forgot to have her say that, that sort of thing. And so I'm always making connections and developing the story, even when I'm not sitting there writing it. But that only happens if I write every day. If I get away from it for a few days, then the story leaves me for a while and I have to refresh it. And I think so many people who aspire to be writers think that they're going to write a day or two every weekend or something like that, and they'll be able to turn out a book or something. And really, it's a lot harder if you do it that way. Write an hour every day and keep your mind in it. Keep your mind working on the story.
Absolutely. The practice gets you a lot closer to perfect. I'm in agreement with you, and I try to find an excuse to write when I am writing pretty much every day. And it's extremely relaxing, and I'm there with you. I love figuring out how things work and teaching myself how to do stuff.
Yeah, writing is a craft. And it's like any craft, the more you work at it, the better you get, the more you learn, aside from any particular story, just your ability to handle the tools, so to speak, to perform the craft. And so writing is always important. And yeah, even if you're not working on a specific novel or a plot or a fiction or whatever, writing some all on a real regular basis is exercise. It's training.
Sure. And just to go further with your analogy, your familiarity with those tools that you use goes a very, very long way. Um, you look at people working on a house, you can tell who's holding the nail gun for the first time and who's been doing it for 20 years. Uh,
Yep.
and
Good analogy.
they're very comfortable with it, and they've done it so many times. They've screwed it up. They've shot themselves through the hand a few times. But they're very comfortable with it, and they know when to use it and when they need to use an impact. So yeah, I definitely agree that the practice is essential, and it's good to hear that you're doing that every day, even if you aren't making a series just yet. I believe that if the inspiration comes, people could see a sequel to Synthetic Woman. Um,
Hmm.
as far as how things are going right now, you said you were writing a uh, pre-Civil War uh, fiction,
It
right?
starts on the yeah, it starts on the eve of the Civil War, and goes through the Civil War. But
Okay.
it starts in Charleston, South Carolina, as the elites there, the movers and shakers there, are trying to decide, whether to secede from the Union or not, and whether, if they secede from the Union, and most of them are in favor of doing that, whether it'll lead to war or not, and how they can secede from the Union and avoid war, and that kind of thing. So, but yeah, it's a historical fiction that starts on the eve of the Civil War.
Great. Well, do you have? You said that you put a manuscript out in about 6 months when you were inspired and excited for a first draft. Do you have any idea of when you're expecting to be releasing that, or is it when it's done, it's done?
Well, the ultimate answer is the latter. When it's done, it's done. Uh, I've been working on it less. I've been less productive with it than I was with Synthetic Woman, largely because I've been so busy with the publication process of Synthetic Woman, the revisions and stuff. Like I said, I turned out the first draft in 2023. I had a number of beta readers read it and give me feedback, and I've got a writer's critique group that I'm a member of, and they read a couple of chapters every month, and then we get together and discuss it and stuff. So I was doing a lot of revisions and a lot of follow-up work on Synthetic Woman while trying to get started on this other book. So that's I've been working on that one probably for about 6 months now, maybe a little longer, and I'm maybe a third of the way through it. I'm on chapter 15 now. It's probably going to be close to 40 chapters when it's done. Uh,
Gotcha.
and that's just a rough estimate. I mean, it's hard to say until I get there. But I'm expecting, as far as when will I finish that? I'll finish the first draft probably early next year. I'll probably be done with the first draft, and then I'll go into the beta reader process and have my critique group scrub it and beat me up over it, and I'm not sure how long it'll take to get from publication from then, but probably another year to get it to publication. And
Gotcha.
so I'll start marketing it, trying to market to agents, because I always try to go traditional publisher first, unless I can't get it done before I self-publish. But I'll start marketing it to agents sometime next year for sure.
Well, that sounds like a realistic timeline, and I know that the publication process can be a bit drawn out, especially depending on what they have to get their own approvals for and everything. If any material is ever used that is already copyrighted or anything, getting those permissions and approvals really draws things out from what I'm hearing from a few folks. Would you say that you're probably planted in fiction now that you're done with your studies and everything, you're retired, aside from the fact
Yeah,
that you
that's
decided to be a writer?
that's a good question. That's a good question because when I retired from Rand, I I decided then, okay, I'm going to write fiction from now on, and I'm not interested in doing any more academic work. I'm not, of course, I teach, but I'm not interested in writing academic material or analytical material or anything like that. Uh, and for the most part, I've been able to step away from it. But I have had two things published in nonfiction since then because people browbeat me into writing them. I, I'm considered an expert in certain fields, and there was somebody who came to me, of an acquaintance, kind of a former colleague. He was a former dean at the school, this Air Force Strategy School that I taught at, but in a different era. Where I was a student there, and then I went away to do my doctorate and spend a couple of years in the Pentagon doing strategy work in the Pentagon, and then I came back to the faculty of the SAS, the school, the strategy school, and in that interim period, he was the dean of the SAS, and so he knew me indirectly. We had talked on the phone a few times, but he was working on a book that was in my field. That was, and he wanted me to write the theory chapter for the book. It was a book of historical case studies about controlling escalation in air warfare. And he wanted me to write the theory chapter on escalation management because I'd done a lot of work in escalation management. And while at Rand, my dissertation advisor was a Nobel laureate who did Cold War work in escalation management. He was one of the original theorists. And so I'm kind of a known name in that particular field, which I know it's normal people don't even know that field exists, but you know how academia is. We have our stovepipes, our tunnels that a few of us work in, that we're the experts in that field, you know. So somebody who works in that field and wants to talk to somebody who really knows what they're talking about, they find one of us, you know. So he wanted me to write the theory chapter for his book on controlling escalation in air warfare. And I said, no, I am done. I am not interested in doing it. I don't want to do that. And and he said, well, you know, we went back and forth. And he says, well, you know, if you don't do it, I'm going to have to write that theory chapter. And he told me his ideas, what he was going to do. And he's a historian, not a political scientist like me. Okay, I'll write the theory chapter for your book. So I end up writing the theory chapter, helping write the introduction, helping write the conclusion, in which we analyze the results of our analyses of the case studies and everything. So that was something that kept me busy for a year or so after retirement. And then a couple of years ago, somebody contacted me wanting me to write a chapter for a book they were having published by Oxford University Press. It was a book on space operations and space warfare and space security. And they wanted me to write a book on deterring attacks on space assets, on orbital assets. And that's another area I published in at RAND is space deterrence related issues. And, you know, once again, I kind of grit my teeth and said, I really don't want to write any more nonfiction. That's work. I want to play. I want to write fiction. I enjoy writing fiction. Writing nonfiction is frickin' work. And I really don't want to do it, but it was Oxford University Press, which is a big, prestigious, I mean, that's one of the top publishing houses in the academic world. So I said, okay, to get published in Oxford, okay, I'll write your theory chapter or your deterring space attacks on space asset. So that's been published. And so those are the two nonfiction things I've done since retiring from RAND. Otherwise, I just play with fiction because that's fun. That's play.
You're right. That's where the passion lives. Everybody needs to leave Forrest alone unless it's an emergency.
Yeah,
for
that's
writing
the
your
way I
nonfiction. Golly, I think we have nailed down just about everything I had on the roster. While we're breaking for the moment, is there anything else you want me to touch on before I start to kind of try to wrap things up?
Yeah, well, the only thing I can say in closing is I hope people will read The Synthetic Woman. I think it's an interesting story, and I think they'll find it to be entertaining. I think they'll find it to be touching in some ways, the relationship between Matt and Evelyn, the human and the synthetic, and their partnership. And it really does explore some important ethical issues that we're going to be facing and some societal and economic challenges we're going to face as we move on in the 21st century. And so I like to use fiction to explore difficult issues. And
agreed. Okay, well, I look forward to looking into the book deeper and and thinking about it and having some existential crises over it. But for everybody else who'd like a little bit of that, where is a good place for everybody to follow you, find your book? If you have a preferred place for folks to shop for that, and where can people kind of keep up with you to see how everything goes on your continuing fiction journey?
yeah, I'm not much of a social media person, which is another thing which is probably not very advantageous financially for me. If I were a much better marketer, I'd be in social media a lot. I do have a Facebook account. I have a LinkedIn account. They can find me there. As far as finding the books, of course, Amazon. And I have an author page on Amazon as well as, and they can follow me in those areas. But they can find the books easily in Amazon. They're also published in print. I mean, Amazon has them published in print and Kindle. And as far as so far, Waking the Snow Leopard is also available in audio. And I'm working on getting it ready and getting Synthetic Woman ready for audio as well. I just haven't had time, kind of like you're struggling to get your editing done. I'm struggling to go through and do the proof listening to the audio version and editing that to make it sound right. But that's available on Amazon. All three versions of Snow Leopard are available on Amazon, and the print and Kindle of Synthetic Woman are available on Amazon. And both of those books are also available in print on draft to digital if people want to shop other places other than Amazon. Because of an exclusivity requirement for Kindle Preferred or something like that, I can't market the Kindle books elsewhere other than Amazon.
Sure.
But print versions, they're available in draft to digital, which markets it to a number of other bookstores like Barnes and Noble and Kobo, and a whole range of stores around the world carry the D2D version.
Perfect.
Which words wise is exactly the same. Formatting is a little bit different, but as far as the actual text is exactly the same.
Perfect. We are about out of time, and I just wanted to thank you for coming on. I appreciate you submitting for having us look at the Synthetic Woman. It seems like you and I appreciate a lot of the same things about storytelling, so it was fun to talk to you. Absolutely. And I hope that if you get done with your book in the next couple of years, that you decide to reach back out about the historical fiction that you're writing now. We'd love to talk to you again.
Well, that'd be great. I'll contact you when it's time. And I thank you for having me on your show, on your podcast. I really appreciate it, and it's been a pleasure. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you very much for joining. And for everybody else, follow Forrest on his Facebook or on his LinkedIn. And with that, we will fade to black.